How might the Denver Broncos lessen the blow of losing Tim Patrick for the entire 2022 NFL season with a torn ACL? Who are some in-house options? And is this a reason why the Broncos drafted a specific player in the 2022 NFL draft? You get that and much more in today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome into a brand new episode, Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to everybody in Broncos country who makes Locked on Broncos their first listen of the day every single day on your favorite audio podcasting platform, or whether you watch us here on YouTube. Do us a favor, if you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe to that follow button so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content, and coverage. Sayre, Bedinger, myself, we have you covered every single day, all year long, from the South Stands to the end zone. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, senior Broncos analyst, reporter for Mile High Sports, joined alongside by my co-host, Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantlyorange.com. Sayre, still kind of freshly removed from the Tim Patrick injury and the diagnosis of his torn ACL. Everybody in Broncos country is bummed out, rightfully so. We have to look at being forward-thinking here in this situation, and we have to maybe take a look at maybe how the Broncos might address the loss of Tim Patrick going into this upcoming season, because we're just getting ready to approach 3 straight preseason games.
Right. And with everybody kind of thinking or maybe hoping the team's going to look to the best available free agent or trade option, it sounds more like the Broncos are going to be looking at in-house options first and foremost. And that's really been George Paton's MO. I know it's a small sample size, but you feel like he really wants to promote from within, or maybe even, scour for some of those under the radar type of guys, bringing in players like Travis Fulgham, who's already on the roster, who they brought onto the practice squad last year. So guys that have been around that have kind of already received that label of, hey, this is kind of our risk reward option that's on the roster right now. There's guys on the Denver Broncos, Cody, that I feel like, stepping in for Tim Patrick, nobody's going to be able to go out there and immediately replace Tim Patrick, at least in as far as we can tell, because you never know when the next Tim Patrick is going to step up. But at the same time, guys in-house right now, I feel like there's quite a few options, especially if you're looking, like I always do, me, from the optimistic point of view.
Well, and I think as well, looking at just comparables, right? You mentioned, I think you nailed it perfectly. You can't replace Tim Patrick's production or maybe his impact and efficiency that he's provided, but maybe you could spread that out amongst some other players. And then I'll kind of formulate into a topic a little bit later on in today's show here. But let's take a look at one player that is on this Broncos roster right now that's not named Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler, or Montreal Washington, that is comparable in terms of size right now. And that's Seth Williams. Seth Williams comes in at 6'3", 211 pounds. I mean, he's just an inch shorter than Tim Patrick, and he really probably might be the best in line to get a little bit of that responsibility to play there. But it goes back to what Nathaniel Hackett had said. We want our guys to be able to work inside, outside, and not just specialize as being an outside receiver or a slot receiver or as a guy who we're going to use in the motion. He wants them to be able to do all of that. But I just can't help but think, if you're looking to have that type of impact from a player who has a similar body type to Tim Patrick, Seth Williams is probably the closest wide receiver on the roster that they'll get to in terms of that.
He really is. And I think that exactly what you just said is exactly what I was thinking back in the 2021 NFL draft before the Broncos even took him. I was tweeting out there like, hey, the Broncos should pick this guy up in case, at the time we didn't know if Tim Patrick was going to be traded. We didn't know if the Broncos were going to keep him beyond 2021. We didn't know what the situation was going to be as of last year, about 18 months ago. So now you're kind of getting the opportunity to see like what life without Tim Patrick could be like. And I think Seth Williams is the guy that, like you said, I mean, size profile, very similar. Seth Williams is going to give you a massive catch radius. We saw that in his game against the Los Angeles Chargers last year. He's capable of making some big plays down the field, and he's capable, if you put the ball in his area, he's kind of like a great rebounder in basketball. I mean, he's going to go up and he's going to fight for the ball, whether or not he comes down with it. That's why he fell to the 6th round, right? Is because obviously at Auburn, there weren't many on-target passes thrown his direction. And when they were, in his vicinity, he wasn't able to always come down with them, had a little bit of issues with drops in his final season there as a member of Auburn. But certainly when you look at physical traits and when you look at the potential, Seth Williams is the guy that I feel like if you put out there with Russell Wilson, if you give Russell Wilson a target that big, he's going to be able to go out there and do some nice things for you. So I hope that's what we see as the Broncos continue to progress here in training camp. But he's certainly not alone on this roster in terms of players that could kind of pick up the slack.
Well, yeah, we're talking about some guys now that are 6'2", just a couple inches shorter than Tim Patrick. That's Tyree Cleveland, Brandon Johnson, and Travis Fulgham. I mean, these guys you want to see a little bit more out of going into the preseason. On day 7 of Broncos camp, it was a low intensity practice. This was that third day of the week. So Nathaniel Hackett said, hey, we're going to go through the jog through pace here. Broncos receivers with Russell Wilson, Brett Rippon, Josh Johnson, they were working on a drill where they were just running a route downfield, and they were working on locating the football and then body adjusting to it, throwing passes behind them, working on the back shoulder stuff. They were just working on that chemistry with one another there, but no Tyree Cleveland for the second consecutive day after he left practice a few days ago after getting hit in the throat. Haven't even seen him out there. And Kendall Hinton didn't participate in today's practice. He wore his jersey and was kind of helping off on the side. So not much clarity as to like what's going on there. So Denver's already down a couple of guys at the position, which makes room for guys like Brandon Johnson, Travis Fulgham, the opportunity to ball out a little bit more. Caden Davis, Trey Quinn, and so at this point, I think we also have to ask, like, do Trey Quinn, Caden Davis, and even like Kendall Hinton at this point, do they have a shot at making this roster, which is another question I think we'll throw a little bit later. I'm more so looking at Trey Quinn and Caden Davis in this conversation. I think Kendall, because of his value, because of his relationship with Russ, now with the Tim Patrick injury, I think that Kendall Hinton will probably be a roster lock.
You got to think so, certainly. And it does stink to kind of see all these names that are missing practice, right? It makes you wonder, man, should the Broncos go out and grab somebody else, even if it's just somebody for camp, another upside shot on somebody? It doesn't have to be a $10 million player, but you got to get more bodies out there. And definitely it's a little concerning. We're talking about, 3 of the guys that if we were to project before training camp started, if we were to project the top 6 receivers, guys that we thought would make the roster, 3 of those guys aren't practicing, and one of them's out for the year. So I think definitely the Broncos are going to have some questions to answer. It brings back all the terrible memories from last year of who we were talking on episodes of this show. Like, the Broncos need to go pick up so-and-so, and they got into a really sticky situation there. Now you're already one man down. To me, Cody, I feel like either these young guys got to step up quickly, or you got to go after some players in free agency, or maybe even some, lower budget trades. We're not making a blockbuster trade here, but see if you can, get, N'Keal Harry went for a 7th round pick. There's players out there that you could grab. So to me, I feel like this is a major area for these guys in the interim before a move happens to come out there and really step up. But you're right, Trey Quinn and Caden Davis, they have a shot simply because they offer some value as well on special teams, as well as they do on offense.
See, I would be shocked at this point if the Broncos try to trade for anybody, and here's why: because George Paton wants more draft picks. They currently sit at 5 right now, and he said we're not going to be at 5. We're going to have more going into next year's draft. So I don't know if he wants to dip into his arsenal a little bit, or even dip into like the future arsenal of his war chest to be able to do that. But I do imagine they'll be monitoring the waivers of players after this upcoming week, after the first week of preseason concludes, where the rosters go from 90 to 85, the second week where they go from 85 to 80, and then the final week where it goes from 80 to 53. I expect Denver to be very aggressive on the waiver wire at the end of preseason, which could in turn, maybe Broncos could find a gem that just didn't land in the preseason for another team. We'll see if that all pans out here. But Broncos country, could the Broncos have an option that doesn't play wide receiver already on the roster? We talk about who that may be and what their role could be to impact the loss of Tim Patrick and this offense. But before we do that, let me tell you about Built Bar, the sponsor of today's episode, Lockdown Broncos. And Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar that is out there on the market today. They have a wide variety of different flavors. Plus, they also have the cookie dough chunk puffs that they have just released at built.com. If you love cookie dough like I do, make sure you indulge yourself in a cookie dough chunk puff at built.com. Plus, they have the amazing 9 original flavors that they already released at built.com. And the thing I like about Built Bar is they contain 17 grams of protein, 130 calories, and only 4 grams of sugar. They're a healthy protein bar that's covered in 100% milk chocolate. You can't get better value than that. So I want you to go to built.com here today to check out all the wide variety of flavors that Built has to offer, including the Built Puffs. Find a box for you and the family and get yours for 15% off when you use promo code LOCKED15. Once again, promo code LOCKED15 gets you 15% off your next order at built.com. Could Greg Dulcich be the option for the Broncos after the loss of Tim Patrick to an ACL injury early on in the week? Thank you once again for making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day in your favorite podcast provider here on YouTube. Once again, make sure you hit that subscribe or that follow button so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content, and coverage. Sayre, one thing I was thinking about after Tim Patrick's injury was announced as a torn ACL, he's going to miss the remainder of the season. I started going through the roster at wide receiver. We started looking at those guys there. We started saying, okay, who could the Broncos maybe ask to do a little bit more? We've talked about some of those guys. But then I thought to myself, there's one guy that I think could really fit the mold to maybe help replace or help step into where Tim Patrick was. And that's Greg Dulcich. Because here's the thing, Greg Dulcich's size and speed at 6'4" is something that kind of reminds me a little bit of Tim Patrick. Now, I'm not sure who's the fastest between those two. We haven't seen them race, but where Greg Dulcich is projected to play, not as an inline guy, but as a flex slot, kind of some of the stuff that we've been seeing Tim Patrick do there. With that ability alone, he can impact this Broncos offense.
He really can. And this goes all the way back to the ideas that we were dreaming up when Greg Dulcich was drafted, right? We were talking about how could the Broncos incorporate him into the offense. And one of the issues that kept on popping up for a lot of people on Twitter and in the comment section and things like that is like, well, can Dulcich block? Which I think is so interesting because really, if he's scoring 8 touchdowns a year, who cares if he can block? But like we talked about in previous episodes back at the draft, I think that definitely, and I don't mean to diminish blocking. I know our good friend Patrick Coyote got on my back about that. Tight ends blocking is important, but if Greg Dulcich can block from the big slot position, which I believe he can, I believe we saw at UCLA, I feel like that's going to be his greatest asset to the Broncos in this wide zone offense, getting runs outside the tackle, having a big body like Greg Dulcich playing in that flex position, that big slot position. I think he can be a real asset there for you, even with Alberto Cuebunam or Eric Saubert or anybody else at the tight end position on the field as well, because it gives you options. That's what the Broncos have right now. Even without Tim Patrick, we talked about this all offseason. They have so many options, so many different varieties of personnel packages that they can put out on the field. And that's where I think Greg Dulcich can really help you, because he's a reliable target in the passing game that you can flex all over the formation.
Well, one thing we were even talking about with Tim Patrick, Sayre, where did he offer the Broncos a lot of value as a receiver? Not just his touchdowns, but also his ability to move the chains. Now, 39 of Patrick's 53 catches in 2021, you know what it did? It moved the chains for a first down. So if Greg Dulcich can slide into this type of role where on third down or even like second and short, if he can be a guy that catches passes, that moves the chains consistently, he's going to have a big time role. And I think this is an area where he can immediately come in and have an impact as a chain mover, because look, 17.6 yards per catch during his 4-year career at UCLA is something that I think a lot of people sleep on. Like, his ability to get open is insane. At 6'4", 245 pounds, he can move. Now, granted, he's still kind of easing his way back in from the hamstring injury. He's doing a little bit more each and every day as the Broncos take the field. The Broncos just being very smart with it. If Dulcich can enter the season healthy, I would not be shocked if the Broncos ask him to fulfill a little bit of that flex slot role, maybe even some stuff on the outside. It allows them to be very creative with even how they use their tight ends like Eric Saubert, Andrew Beck, and even Eric Tomlinson, who's caught a couple passes at training camp as is. But even more so, Sayre, I want to go back to your point about blocking. On tape, you look at it, Dulcich can block nickel corners. He can block safeties. He can block other cornerbacks. I think that our concern for Dulcich would be if the Broncos drafted him to be an inline guy, where you're going to put him on the edge against some of the NFL's best pass rushers. Like, that's not a fair thing to do to a rookie. Unfortunately, like, if Pat Shurmur was still here, that's probably what we would see a lot of Greg Dulcich doing. But I think he's going to be a great outside flex slot option that can block, that can also help out in the run game. Kind of what we see a little bit similar to Travis Kelce's utilization with the Kansas City Chiefs AFC West division rival. Do you agree? Do you disagree?
I completely agree. I completely agree, just because I feel like that's where he's strongest, and you want to use your guys in the areas where they excel, not where they're weak. Like Noah Fant, no offense to Noah Fant, but he wasn't the best right tackle on the team last year. So blocking Max Crosby and blocking other guys like that not going to work out very well. But to me, Cody, we can talk until we're blue in the face about all these back end roster guys that could step up in Tim Patrick's absence, when really it's going to be a committee approach of guys that were already in the primary plans, like Greg Dulcich, right? So it's not necessarily going to be, well, now Seth Williams is going to be the Tim Patrick role in the offense. That's not necessarily going to be the case. And that's why we're talking about Greg Dulcich right now, because Dulcich was already in the offensive plans. Now it's a
Yep.
matter of how are you going to incorporate him in different ways than you may have initially planned on. So it's getting those guys that were already in the plans even more so into the plans, like Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, those guys, whatever their catch projections were before, take the over at this point for sure. So, and the same for Greg Dulcich. And I think that definitely getting to see, even if it was a jog through, getting to see some video highlights of him out at practice on Wednesday and seeing him go through some routes and do some of those things, that was nice, because we know he's been working off to the side for the majority of training camp, been nursing that hamstring injury. So seeing him back out there, getting closer and closer to maybe a full participant in practice, that's really encouraging to see.
It's something that Broncos country needs to keep an eye on, because on Thursday, the Broncos will be in full pads. Once again, the intensity will ramp up. They'll go a little bit lighter on Friday, according to Broncos head coach Nathaniel Hackett. And then Saturday will once again be a fully padded, high-intensity practice. And then next week, it's game week, Broncos country. But one question we need to ask is, do the Broncos carry 7 wide receivers onto the active roster going into the 2022 NFL season with Tim Patrick's injury? We debate and discuss that coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about the sponsor of today's episode, Lockdown Broncos. It's our friends over there at BetterHelp. Life is full of twists and turns, and it's important to show up for yourself through it all. And BetterHelp Online Therapy will assess your needs and can match you with your own licensed professional therapist in less than 48 hours. I've been using BetterHelp as part of the Locked On podcast, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to indulge myself in some therapy here. And it's important to be open. It's important to be able to advocate for yourself, especially when things are hectic and busy for you. You need to be there for yourself. And it's not a crisis line. It's not a self-help. It's professional therapy done securely online, available to people worldwide. And with therapy, it can take a few tries to find the right fit for you. BetterHelp makes it easy and free to change therapists if needed. And it's more affordable than traditional offline therapy, and financial aid is also available. Visit their website and read their testimonials that are posted daily. And they have a special offer for my listeners. 10% is what you can get off your first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. Once again, that's 10% off your first month of online therapy at betterhelp.com/lockedon. Should the Denver Broncos carry 7 wide receivers on the active roster coming into the 2022 NFL season? This is a question that everybody in Broncos country wants answered. Thank you so much once again for making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day. Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate you so much. Make sure you interact with us in the YouTube comment section. If you're watching us there, make sure you like the video and hit that little bell notification so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content, and coverage, courtesy Locked On Broncos. Sayre, looking at this roster right now, as is, let's say that the Broncos completely take an in-house roster approach. Who could the Broncos' 7 wide receivers be? Because I feel like we were debating it here on the show heading into training camp, previewing it. Should the Broncos carry 7 wide receivers on the active roster this upcoming season? And I think that we were like, it's debatable with guys like Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler, Tim Patrick. But now that you lose a guy like Tim Patrick, and you may need to spread that production or the demand on the wide receiver room a little bit out more, I feel like 7's probably going to be realistic. We may just see that. So, in your opinion, who are some roster locks? I feel like there's 4 names on this roster right now that I believe are roster locks, at least going into the season.
Yeah, I'm glad you wrote this in the show notes too, because I think it's worth discussing as a kind of a side point that Montreal Washington, the rookie 5th round pick, has solidified himself as a roster lock. I mean, he has played so well at training camp that, I mean, 5th round picks, are they a lock to make the roster every year? Not necessarily, depending on how good your roster is, but I mean, it's still a pretty high draft pick. So we kind of expected him to be there. We kind of, wanted to wait and see, but man, I feel like he's kind of blown away expectations as far as his usage in the offense, as well as special teams as a return man. So definitely including him as a lock right there. And then you mentioned it before, the chemistry that Russell Wilson has built with Kendall Hinton, I think is really important. And it's worth, taking into at least the preseason to say, I feel like right now you could you could sort of write Kendall Hinton's name in with a pen and cross it out later if you have to, because I feel like he's one of those guys that he's developed that chemistry with Russ. He generated a lot of positive hype in the offseason. I feel like he's consistently been impressive to the coaching staff, not just this one, but the previous one and the front office. So he's somebody that I think you can pencil in. The question marks come after those two guys to me, where you have players like Travis Fulgham, and Tyree Cleveland and Brandon Johnson and all these different guys out there, Trey Quinn, Seth Williams, Caden Davis. You've been out at practice, Cody, for the first 7 days. Obviously, we've had 2 kind of jog through days mixed in there, only 1 padded practice. But we heard a lot of great things about Travis Fulgham at OTAs. We heard some good things about Tyree Cleveland coming into camp. Obviously, he's been out for a couple days now. Do you think there's anybody there that's really separated themselves? If the Broncos do say Montreal Washington's our 4th lock and Kendall Hinton's the 5th, if you had to pick 2 guys on that list, who are the 2 that are standing out the most right now?
Ooh, this is a tough one. You're putting me on the spot here. Okay, so Cortland, Jerry, KJ, Montrell, Hinton. Let's say those are the 5 guys. I would have to say Brandon Johnson's one of them, and I would have to go with Seth Williams. I haven't seen as much from Travis Fulgham in terms of the team period. We haven't been seeing a lot of connections or even a lot of plays from him. But guys like, Seth Williams, maybe getting involved a little bit more. He was working with the first team offense a little bit. He is one of those guys there. But even just Brandon Johnson. Brandon Johnson has been one of those players that has been consistently making plays. And he's been making more plays than any of the other guys that we're talking about here. The guys like the Caden Davises or the Trey Quinns. Those would be my 2 guys. I don't know. Like, how do
Yeah.
we feel about that?
I like it, honestly. I think, and I like to kind of read into things a little bit, so like who shows up at Russell Wilson's workouts at San Diego, taking note of everybody in the photo and everything. And Brandon Johnson was one of those guys. And I can't help but notice as well that 9 News insider Mike Kliss did an entire feature about Brandon Johnson, and maybe it just piqued his interest, the fact that his dad used to be a major league catcher for the Florida Marlins and briefly for, the Colorado Rockies as well. Maybe his name only piqued interest for that reason, but I can't help but think, I just these tea leaves. I'm a tea leaf reader. I feel like definitely if you follow the breadcrumbs, Brandon Johnson may have a better chance than meets the eye. And so we'll see kind of as preseason rolls along. I feel like you want to keep at least a couple of guys. If our top 5 are Sutton, Judy Hamler, and then Washington and Hinton, if you're going to keep 7, I feel like you might want to keep a couple of guys that have some size, right? And you mentioned it in the first segment. Seth Williams obviously is the closest on the roster to what Tim Patrick brought to the table in terms of size. And one of the next guys there is Brandon Johnson. And that's with all due respect to Tyree Cleveland. And we want to see I want to see all these guys in preseason games. I want to see more and hear more about how they do in 11 on 11 now that Tim Patrick is not in the fold. But I feel like, man, you can't help but want to root for these, unsung, undrafted Cinderella stories at this time of training camp. That's what it's all about. Go out there, make the plays, make yourself uncuttable, essentially. And there's some connections with Brandon Johnson. One of the most important ones, and I think it's worth noting, wide receivers coach Zach Azzanni recruited him to play at Tennessee. So there's a huge connection there between Azzanni and the Broncos, and then Brandon Johnson, who's coming in and had a very, very nice training camp so far. Also made it out to Russell Wilson's workouts in San Diego. Also got himself a little feature there on 9 News from Mike Kliss. Maybe there's something there.
There's certainly, if you're looking at the writing on the wall, but I also think that even if you don't bring a guy like a Caden Davis, who's been the first guy on the practice field every day, or Trey Quinn, you could probably store one of those guys on the practice squad. Heck, you know what? You may even be able to get away with storing Travis Fulgham on the practice squad once again. If, like, worst case scenario, that could be something that the Broncos do. I know one thing is for certain, the Broncos player personnel department, George Payton, they're monitoring everything very, very closely as it pertains to this wide receiver position. But overall, you can't replace Tim Patrick's production, but you can hope to spread it out amongst other people. And that's the ultimate definition of team football there. And we'll look forward to seeing all the action throughout the upcoming week of preseason training camp, leading up to next week's first preseason game against the Dallas Cowboys on Saturday, August 13th. We're going to have you covered here on the Lockdown Broncos podcast as always. But Broncos country, thank you so much for tuning in, making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day. Thank you so much for watching us on YouTube. We appreciate you so much. Interact with us on social media, interact with us on our YouTube comment section as well. We love all the conversation, all the discussion points from everybody in Broncos country. The pads, the intensity continues on here for day 8 at the UCL Training Center. Sayre, Bedinger, and myself will be back tomorrow for a brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.